You turn on like the 11 o'clock news and you might hear something like this person with schizophrenia attacked somebody in the park. But you'll never hear this person with schizophrenia woke up in the morning, had some coffee, went to work, came home from work, had some dinner, went to bed. You never hear that on the news. You only hear the bad stuff on the news. So if you only hear the bad things, you're not going to know that there's good things too.
These illnesses are brain illnesses that no one requested any more than someone with Alzheimer's.
Welcome to Season 2 of Students of Mind, the podcast where we aim to normalize conversations about mental health. Last season, we connected you with experts in the field of mental health to provide an understanding of topics and illnesses that may not have been easily accessible. This season, we will continue our learning journey together by not only speaking to experts, but also by listening to the voices and stories of real people who are living, surviving, and even thriving while also facing challenges with their mental health in their everyday life. This season, we want to hear your stories to get the full truth of what it's like to manage one's mental health and navigate living with mental illness. I'm your host, Jayde, and on today's episode, we're exploring schizophrenia, one of, if not the most misunderstood mental illness to date. Today, my two guests are both passionate about reducing the stigma around schizophrenia and related disorders. First, I will speak to Linda Stalters, the founder of Schizophrenia and Related Disorders Alliance of America, to talk about what schizophrenia and psychosis really are. Then I have a discussion with Michelle Hammer, an artist, schizophrenia activist, and the founder of Schizophrenic NYC, to talk about her experience with living with schizophrenia. I hope by listening to the show, you're able to learn something new and gain some encouragement through hearing our experts and listening to the journeys of our guests. However, this show is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your mental health professional or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have about your condition. Never disregard professional advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on the Students of Mind podcast. For the first part of the show, we're going to do things a little differently this time. I'm going to walk you guys through the conversation with our first guest. It was a lot of information, and I want to make sure that it's clear and that you're able to understand everything that we talked about. I sat down with Linda Stalters, the founder of Schizophrenia and Related Disorders Alliance of America, or SARDA, and a retired registered nurse psychotherapist.
I have worked as a nurse since 1966. I went through several different degrees and certifications and specialized as an advanced practice registered nurse, as a psychotherapist, and I've worked in everything from ICU, CCU, med-surg, OBGYN, inpatient, university patient facilities and offices. And I had a private practice in the Washington, D.C. area. And I've also been a volunteer with the American Red Cross as a mental health and health services disaster volunteer, and on the board and on several mental health organization boards. And in 2008, I started Schizophrenia and Related Disorders Alliance of America, or SARDA, as a national organization, and now has a global reach with support groups. And this organization was founded so that we could improve lives and save lives of those with the most severe neuropsychiatric illnesses. And they are people who live with the most misunderstood diseases, and they are the most maligned, misunderstood, underserved, and untreated of our population. And so just recently, I retired from the position as CEO of SARDA, but I continue to do advocacy work. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Like many mental illnesses, schizophrenia tends to be misunderstood by and misrepresented to the general public. Although over the past few years there have been advocates and people living with schizophrenia, like today's second guest, Michelle Hammer, it's still widely misrepresented in the mainstream media. So what is schizophrenia? And what symptoms do people with schizophrenia experience?
Schizophrenia isn't one illness because it depends on what part of the brain is affected, and that determines what kind of symptoms one is experiencing. And schizophrenia is really, we should change the name of schizophrenia because it's misunderstood. And one of the things that we as an organization have initiated and other organizations have picked up on is reclassification of schizophrenia because it is a brain illness. So it's a brain disorder, brain illness. Several different names could be. It could be called a neurological brain illness or disease or disorder, or a developmental disease or disorder, or so those are some of the terms that could be used to describe actually what it is. And there are multiple etiologies or causes of the changes within the brain's development. And so first of all, I'll talk a little bit about the symptoms. And most people know that the hallmark symptom is hallucinations or psychosis. So hallucinations being one of the symptoms of psychosis. And hallucinations can be, hearing something that isn't there. And most often we know of people who hear voices. And sometimes those voices are clear, sometimes the voices aren't clear, and sometimes it can be multiple voices, and sometimes they can be just mumbling. And most often they're very destructive and mean voices saying terrible things to people. And sometimes they can be command voices, hallucinations from someone who they perceive as being a person of authority, and they can be totally real to them. They actually hear the voices and the sounds that they might hear. There's a part of the brain, it's called the Broca's Center. And when they have a PET scan, and someone who doesn't have schizophrenia is hearing someone talk to them, this Broca's Center is functioning. And when someone who has schizophrenia is hearing voices or sounds, that Broca's Center is working. So they're actually hearing what they say they hear. So hearing voices or sounds can be one form of hallucinations. They can see things that are not there. They can sense whatever senses we have because it's a neurological disease or disorder. So it's neurology that determines what we see, feel, hear, taste, or smell. So any of those senses can be affected depending on what part of the brain, what neurotransmitters are being affected. So they could hear something, smell something, taste something, feel something on their skin, or see something that isn't what we see, hear, smell, or taste. Delusions, they're fixed false beliefs, but they are totally real to the person who's experiencing them. And some of the delusions can be a grandiosity. They might wholeheartedly believe that they might be a deity. They might be, a saint or a president, or might have thoughts and delusions that they're working with the government, or the government is working with them, or that sort of thing, where they feel that they are very powerful. And they might have paranoid delusions. They may think that people are conspiring against them, that the CIA or the FBI are conspiring against them. And then they may think that the people who are having a totally unrelated conversation across the street are talking about them. And so the paranoia can be very, very disconcerting. It can be very powerful in limiting the way people interact with other people. They may not want to leave the place where they live, and it can cause more isolation because they're afraid of what might transpire if they leave their place of comfort. They might have disorganized speech or even at a state where they can't even move, catatonic. They can have impaired cognition or disturbance in the way that they process information. And these are really symptoms that interfere with everyday life. And some of the symptoms can be like depression. And that's why many people are initially diagnosed with depression, because they have lack of enjoyment of activities or being involved with other people, isolation, and they have inertia, they have lack of motivation, and often they're misinterpreted as being lazy. They're not lazy. Those are some of what's called negative symptoms.
So let's go over some terms Linda mentioned. First, let's learn a little bit more about what psychosis is.
Psychosis is the experience of non-reality. So if you have a hallucination or you have a delusion, those are psychosis. It's not based on reality, although they can be extracted from reality at times. But psychosis is experiencing something that is not real, like hearing a voice that is not there, or hearing a sound that is not there, having a delusion that someone planted a transmitter in my body, or having the delusion that there are speakers in every wall listening to me, or having the delusion that I can read your mind, or you know what I'm thinking, or believing that some catastrophic event was caused by something you did that is not caused by something you did. Those are delusions. There are other things that, other diseases that can cause psychosis. So even in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, people can have delusions and hallucinations. Schizoaffective disorder, people can have psychosis. People with major mood disorder like depression, very severe depression, can have psychosis. Bipolar disorder on either end of the continuum, whether they are so depressed or so manic, they can have delusions and hallucinations. And of course, drugs, illicit drugs, and some other medications might cause some changes within the senses. Electrolyte imbalance and some sort of other change like a lesion in the brain or a tumor in the brain, hypo or hyperthyroidism, or diabetic hypo or hyper sugar. Those kind of things have to be looked at to differentiate why a person is having these psychotic symptoms.
So symptoms of psychosis are not isolated to people with schizophrenia and related disorders. There are actually a handful of other things that could lead to delusions or hallucinations, and I think that's important to note. I also want to note that the type of hallucinations or delusions can vary greatly in intensity and subject matter, and tend to be very personal to the person experiencing the symptom. So the specific examples that Linda gave are not the only ways psychosis is experienced. Linda also talked about negative and positive symptoms. We generally associate the terms positive and negative with good or bad. However, that's not the case when we talk about schizophrenia.
So negative symptoms can be thought of as the symptoms that are the lack of what other people experience, like seeming to be fatigued and tired, lack of enjoying everyday activities or things that you used to enjoy. Some of the same symptoms of acute depression and other cognitive symptoms. And one is what's called anosognosia, which is the inability to perceive or be aware that you have an illness or that what you're experiencing is not normal. You have no idea that you have an illness, that everything that you're experiencing is totally normal. And so therefore that causes the greatest problem with someone adhering to any kind of treatment plan, because if you don't have a problem, why would you talk to someone? Why would you take a medication if you're not ill? And then the positive symptoms are things that a person experiences that other people don't experience, like hearing voices, having delusions, having hallucinations, having like a different kind of language, and those kind of things that people most generally associate with schizophrenia. And they too are difficult to cope with, but many people complain that the negative symptoms really cause more problem than the positive symptoms. Sometimes, although it's very, very, very difficult to cope with the hallucinations and delusions, trying to have the energy to do things is even more burdensome. So yeah, negative symptoms can be like the lack of behavior, and positive means the addition of behaviors. And it's not just behaviors, it's what you experience.
Now that we've learned about some of the hallmark symptoms of schizophrenia, you may wonder, how does someone receive a clinical diagnosis? And how common is it for people with schizophrenia to be misdiagnosed?
It is a clinical diagnosis that's determined by following the criteria in the DSM, which is the Diagnostical Statistical Manual. And it first needs to be differentiated from other psychiatric and medical diseases and illnesses, which could be heavy metal toxicity, adverse effects of drugs and abuse of drugs, vitamin deficiencies, other illnesses, mood disorders, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, which is very, very closely related, and that's part of the syndrome. It's a schizophrenia syndrome, and schizoaffective disorder and bipolar disorder are very closely related to schizophrenia, and very difficult sometimes to differentiate those diseases. And because schizoaffective disorder and a major depressive disorder and bipolar disorders can have and often do have psychotic features. Some people are first in their youth diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder or a communication disorder. But as they age, they might develop prominent delusions or hallucinations. And if those symptoms last for more than a month, then schizophrenia can be suspect. So predominantly the delusions, the hallucinations, the disorganized speech must be present. At least one of the symptoms must be present to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, as well as one other symptom, perhaps one of those three, or the negative symptoms. So the signs and symptoms need to exist for at least 6 months before they can actually get the diagnosis. So it's a medical disease. It's not something that someone elects to have. It's not an existential way of thinking.
Linda also mentioned earlier that schizophrenia is a sort of syndrome. But what does that mean?
They used to point out different types of schizophrenia. However, because a person's symptoms change, and so at one time they might say that they are catatonic, one time they might say that they are paranoid, or they are having delusions of grandeur, or something like that. So now they don't call them different types, but they will look at the different symptoms that someone is experiencing while having schizophrenia and what their the degree of acuity. So these are schizophrenias because they are different, but there's no different name for any of them. It's a schizophrenia spectrum.
So what Linda is explaining is that it used to be believed that each symptom of schizophrenia was its own disease. However, now we know that schizophrenia is on a spectrum, meaning not everyone with schizophrenia experiences the same symptoms. Multiple symptoms can occur simultaneously, and symptoms may change over time. As Linda has mentioned, schizophrenia is a neurological or brain disease. So what exactly is going on in the brains of those with schizophrenia? And what role do genetics and environmental factors play?
People with schizophrenia have damaged or genetic mutations in their genes, or they just have a genetic predisposition that, someone in their family has had schizophrenia. So what happens is the mutations or the genes themselves can interfere with the developing brain, and even at the very time that the brain is forming in utero, during their just their fundamental foundation of the brain. And so therefore a person is predisposed or at risk for developing the schizophrenia symptoms later on. People who have used cannabis early in adolescence are 40% at greater risk of psychosis, which most people don't realize. And if you have schizophrenia, smoking cannabis can trigger your symptoms. Risk factors can be something that you are born with, as I said, because of your genes. And the environment can affect whether the genetic risk can then be triggered into actual symptomology. And sometimes that is caused by genetic factors. And it can be that people who have had significant sexual abuse as children, their brain is formed differently in their structure, and that creates a higher risk for psychosis. And some other factors can be that the mother, when you're in utero, might have been exposed to a virus. There might have been some sort of environmental factor during birth, or something else that might have changed the development of the brain.
Linda briefly mentioned the relationship between cannabis and schizophrenia or psychosis. There has been much debate about cannabis as a cause of schizophrenia, and a lot of research is still being done. So I will include some articles in the resource section for this episode if you'd like to learn more. Like myself, you may be curious to know how common schizophrenia is. However, like many mental illnesses, it's difficult to obtain an accurate number, as there are some people who never seek care.
So schizophrenia is what we think is about 1.1% of the population. So that's over 3 million Americans, but we don't know exactly. SARTA is doing a project to try and discover what the real number might be. It's very difficult to discover because some of the previous resources have not included people who are homeless, people who are incarcerated, and of course, people who don't acknowledge that they have the illness. And that's totally unrealistic.
Now that we know a bit about how people with schizophrenia experience symptoms, the risk factors that exist, and criterion for clinical diagnosis, let's learn a little about the treatment options and modalities that are out there for people seeking care. As some of you may know, mental illnesses used to be treated in ways that were completely inhumane. From being thrown into prisons or other institutions with horrible conditions, to procedures like lobotomies, where holes are drilled into the skull. I know, it sounds terrible, right? And it was. But thankfully, over the years, more ethical and effective forms of treatment have been discovered, and organizations like SARDA continue to research to develop modalities that work for people with schizophrenia.
So the treatment of schizophrenia really requires an integration of all kinds of medical, psychological, and psychosocial modalities. And the bulk of care occurs in the outpatient setting, and it's really best to be carried out in a multidisciplinary team. And psychosocial rehabilitation is an essential part of treatment. NIMH did a study called the RAISE study, Recovery After an Initial Schizophrenia Episode or First Episode Psychosis. So it includes psychoeducation, psychotherapy, medication management, case management, family education and support, and work or education support, depending on the individual's needs and preferences. The client and the team work together to make their treatment decisions involving family members as well as much as possible. The goal is to link the individual with the team as soon as possible after psychotic symptoms begin. There are long-acting injectables of antipsychotics where a person gets an injection and they receive the injection maybe 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and that helps to maintain the therapeutic level within their system so that they can function best.
Linda talked a little more about specific medications for treating symptoms of schizophrenia. However, I'm not going to include that part because everyone responds to medications differently, and I think that if you want to learn more about this aspect of treatment, you should consult with your doctor or other medical professional. Lastly, I asked Linda to talk about some of the misconceptions and to debunk some of the common myths that exist around schizophrenia.
Most people only associate schizophrenia with violence and homelessness. That is certainly not true. The majority of people diagnosed are kind, altruistic, vulnerable, gentle, brilliant, talented, artistic people, and are very kind and loving. With appropriate treatment, that is especially the case. So I just really want people to understand the reality that these illnesses are brain illnesses, that no one requested any more than someone with Alzheimer's to have this illness, and they are due the respect and access to appropriate treatment, just like people that have Alzheimer's.
I want to give a big thank you to Linda Stalters for providing so much information. I learned a lot, and I hope you guys learned some of the science and psychology behind schizophrenia and psychosis. But most importantly, that this illness is complex and varies from person to person. I am so excited to introduce you guys to our next guest, Michelle Hammer. Michelle is a schizophrenia activist, podcast host, and artist. After being diagnosed with schizophrenia in her early 20s, in 2015, Michelle founded the company Schizophrenic NYC, a clothing and merch line with the mission of reducing stigma and normalizing conversations about schizophrenia, psychosis, and mental health in general. The clothing line features designs created by Michelle, as well as positive phrases like "Don't be paranoid, you look great," and "I'm mentally ill and I don't kill." Michelle has been featured in the Tribeca X Award-nominated WebMD documentary titled Voices, where she talks about her experience of living with schizophrenia. Michelle's story, insights, and activism has also been featured in publications such as the Daily Mail, BuzzFeed, Mashable, Psychology Today, and many more. I also want to leave a quick disclaimer here that there's about a minute of this next section where you can hear some banging in the background. I know it's there, but I wanted to leave that section in just because Michelle talks about how she developed her brand, and I think that's really important to include. So yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know that you might hear that. Okay, enjoy our conversation. So, hi, Michelle. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, before we get into the nitty gritty, can you just tell us a little about yourself and the work you do, and just how you're doing today?
Sure. Well, today I'm doing good, having a great day. Woke up, watched The View, see what's going on there. About myself, um, I'm from New York. I went to school to study graphic and web design. I did the New York City grind in all kinds of web graphic design jobs for about 5 years. Then I decided to start working for myself and started the business Schizophrenic NYC mental health clothing line just to try to get people start talking about mental illness and mental health because 1 in 5 New Yorkers has a mental health issue, but nobody talks about it because of all the stigma. So my whole thing is, if it's so common, it doesn't make any sense that there's stigma. So if we could just talk about it more, then and have an open discussion, nobody will be, as ashamed or they won't be as stigmatized and it'll just be more open and honest. And I'm just all about, I say I try to start the conversation and it's up to you to continue it.
Yeah, I think that's what I've admired so much about your work because I've always, I've dealt with my mental illnesses my entire life, and I've always been someone that's like super comfortable with talking about it and talking about the things that I go through, but I've been surrounded by people that aren't that comfortable, and it's really inspiring to see you talking about it in such like a normal way, like you're just having a normal conversation about anything else. Because I feel like people try to tiptoe around topics when it comes to mental health, so it's, like, refreshing to see someone just talk about it in a way that's not like they're scared to be talking about it.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. People are always so nervous. Or they're like, oh, like, because when I first started Schizophrenic NYC, I told people that I was going to start Schizophrenic NYC, and I was told by, even my doctor, are you sure you want to tell everybody? Like, are you really, really sure? And I was like, yes. Cause like having a secret just makes you feel more ashamed. Like, oh, I have this secret and I can't tell anyone because if anybody knows, they're gonna assume things about me. They might be scared of me. When really I told people and all I got was words of praise and people saying they're so proud of me and like they love what I'm doing. I got like a bazillion Facebook messages from people I haven't spoken to in maybe over 5 years. So everyone telling me that was completely wrong, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense. Everybody was wrong.
Yeah, and it's sad that even doctors and, like, psychiatrists are like, "Ooh, maybe you don't wanna, like, say that to people," like, that's the opposite of what I feel like they should be saying to us.
I know. I think it's because, you turn on like the 11 o'clock news and you might hear something like this person with schizophrenia attacked somebody in the park. But you'll never hear this person with schizophrenia woke up in the morning, had some coffee, went to work, came home from work, went out, had some dinner, called some friends, watched some TV, went to bed. You never hear that on the news. You only hear the bad stuff on the news. Never like the that regular person with schizophrenia living life fine. You only hear that person with schizophrenia doing something horrible. So if you only hear the bad things, you're not going to know that there's good things too. So, there's schizophrenia and mental illness, it's all on a spectrum. And if you only hear the bad part of the spectrum, you're only going to assume that it's bad. And
Right.
that could be true for so many different things. You
Mhm.
only hear bad things, you're only going to assume bad things. Like the Bronx. The Bronx has amazing areas, but the Bronx has such a bad reputation. Like, if the Bronx was a person, she'd be very upset.
Okay, so, I think this is a great place to kind of talk about how you got to this place where you are so open about having schizophrenia. So let's kind of go back to the beginning. And can you tell us about like when you were diagnosed with schizophrenia and kind of what were the first signs that you noticed that kind of gave a signal to you that you maybe needed to get help?
Well, yeah. Well, at 18, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I knew something was up because, like, all through high school, I kind of believed my mom was trying to hurt me or sabotage me. I thought everyone that was trying to help me was trying to hurt me, and I kind of thought like my mom's like really trying to kill me. So I go to college, and I think like I'm, free of her. I'm like on my own, and I'm like I don't have that woman trying to hurt me, and everything's fine for the first few weeks, and then all of a sudden, I think my roommate's trying to kill me. Like all the exact same thoughts about that I had about my mom, I had about my roommate. And then it just like clicked in my head. It is me. There was something wrong with me the whole time. My mom wasn't trying to kill me. I was having those thoughts about her that weren't true. She was trying to get me help because I did have a problem. And that's when I went to the health center and said, something's not right. And they told me I was bipolar in like 3 seconds. And I knew that wasn't right, but I just went with it. And things were kind of rough for like college, but I mean, I played sports. My coach helped me out. My teammates helped me out. I had a lot of support with never really telling anyone what exactly was going on. And then after college, I didn't have that same doctor, so I didn't have that medication. And I'm trying to like work these internships, and I'm staring at the computer, but things are flashing in front of my face, and things are going on in my head, and I can't complete a task. So I knew something was up, and I know that I'm not bipolar, but I'm trying to avoid saying that I'm schizophrenic when I knew that I was. So I went to a new doctor, and it just was more open and honest, and they're like, yeah, you're schizophrenic. And at first I was like totally bummed out, and then I went out to dinner with like my three friends from college that I lived with for so long, and I'm all nervous, and we're sitting there, and I'm just like, guys, I want to let you know I have schizophrenia. And seriously, the conversation was like, um isn't that what you had the whole time? That could have not been more obvious. And yeah, we told you that. So I was like, okay, so if my best friends already knew this about me and didn't care, why am I supposed to care about whatever other person really judges me for? Because my best friends cared and then knew and didn't even care at all. So it's like, if you want to judge me, but you can also go away and, bye. Bye. I got friends. I don't need you in my life if you're going to judge me.
Yeah, so do you remember how like when you went to the doctor, how they explained schizophrenia to you?
How they explained it to me, not I don't really remember how they explained it to me because I was
Did
kind
you
of just
Yeah. Did
it
you
was
already have prior knowledge about, like, what it entailed and everything before you had gone to the doctor?
no, not really. And they didn't really get into like medical detail. They just kind of just said, how, I kind of just knew what it was in my head, and that's what I knew. I think I did some research on my own to try to learn more about it, but then you start researching things, you get into things, and then Google can lead you down a really scary hole. You got to be careful about what you're googling sometimes. I like to say I have a MD from Google University. You know, doesn't everyone?
Yeah, I agree. You talked a little bit about how, like, getting your diagnosis kind of made things click and was like, "Oh, yeah, that's right." Can you talk a little bit more about, like, the positive things you experienced and some of the challenges that came with, like, realizing what you were experiencing?
Well, I realized that it was the correct diagnosis because, like, now that I was on the meds to try to actually treat the right diagnosis, but still, like, I was struggling at work. Like, I would still talk to myself at work, and people would say, "Are you on the phone?" So I would be like, "Oh, yeah, I was on the phone." Then it would be like, "Why are you on the phone at work?" I'm like, "Oh, snap. What do I say?" Things would get in the way of just working, and it was just challenging because you can't really tell your coworkers, but how do you explain some of your actions sometimes? Like it's hard. At one place, like I had told HR, so I was brought into HR one time, and they're like, "You look like you were on the phone talking to somebody, but you said you weren't on the phone. That doesn't make sense." And I turned to the HR woman, and I'm like, how do I explain this right now? And she just turned to my boss and was like, you're going to have to excuse her for that. And then he kind of said the same thing. And the HR woman's like, you're going to have to excuse her for that. And then when I went back to my desk, like the project manager, just who's really nosy and rude, was like, so why'd you get excused? I said, I can't talk about it. It's an HR issue. And she goes, you can tell me. I'm like, no, I cannot tell you. It's an HR issue. And she kept prodding me and prodding me and prodding me. And I'm like, why am I getting harassed by this girl who just wants to get into my medical business? It was really rude and really intrusive and really annoying. But that's what it's like at work when you can't explain that you have a mental illness. And it's really frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I've experienced that too of like I don't know, like sometimes I get so caught up in trying to explain what I'm going through, even though I it's really not necessary. And but there's certain people who are just so fixated on trying to know why I'm acting a certain way in particular situations when that like I feel like if it was something else that wasn't mental health related, they wouldn't be prying so much to figure out what's going on with
Right.
me.
Like if you're an amputee, so how'd you lose your leg? Just tell me how you lost it. I want to know. Oh, are you a war veteran? I really want to know. Like, wouldn't that like trigger some PTSD? But
Right,
they wouldn't
exactly.
answer, they wouldn't harass somebody about that, you know? But wait, what did it? Tell me about this. Your mental illness? When did it start? What happened then? Tell me more about it. It's all like, so many people. It's like none of your business. I have a friend who was like, pretty much blind but semi-vision, and he says he can't stand the question when people say, "So what do you see?" He says that he just doesn't even answer that question anymore. And people think he's an asshole. He doesn't care. It's just like he get asked that all the time. And sometimes you just got to
Yeah.
let it be. Just let it be.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I feel like people also have the tendency to, like, want to fix me when
Yeah.
it's like they feel like they have a responsibility to try to fix what I'm going through, and, like, that's not
Yeah.
your responsibility.
People just love to butt in to fix things to just like, "Oh, I'll save like I'll save you.
Mhm.
Why
Yeah.
can't I make you better?"
Now I'm curious to see, like, how were you able to get to a place where, you are so open about, your mental health, and how has being so open about it affected your life and your relationships?
Um Well, I mean, being so open about it, I mean, I started Schizophrenic NYC, where basically I popped up on the streets of New York City with a huge sign that said Schizophrenic NYC, don't be paranoid, you look great. And people were like, what in the world is this? And I would just tell them every time, just the story. I have schizophrenia. I decided to do this. I have my whole spiel, and I got a lot of really good responses. Some were kind of like, okay, lady, whatever you're kind of, what are you doing here? But mostly positive responses. So since I started doing that, people just kind of liked what I was doing, and I started making connections in the mental health advocacy field, and I've made a lot of really awesome friends that way. And it's almost like it's like the tribe of the mental health people. And then it's even closer, like the tribe of the mental health advocates, schizophrenia people is even closer. So it's just like brought me to be even more comfortable knowing that I have like a group of friends that are also in the same area. And I really kind of like what's happened. I've it's like a whole tribe and a group, and I like it, and I like to just spread the word, and I get a lot of DMs all the time like, thank you for what you're doing. It's helping me with my brother, my husband, my daughter, everything like that. It shows hope. So I really like that it's helped so many people. There's always haters, but that's what social media is. There's always going to be haters, but I think it's just brought me to a really good place, and the more people enjoying what I'm doing or being inspired makes me only want to open up more and share more and talk more, just to normalize being open about mental illness and mental health, because it's been shunned for so long.
So, can you talk a little bit about, like, how you experience your schizophrenia and how that affects your day to day?
Well, how I experience my schizophrenia, like everybody kind of experiences it differently, but what happens to me mostly is that I just kind of leave reality and I think I'm somewhere else talking to different people in different places. So usually if like a friend or anyone just sees me doing this, they'll be like, "Hey, hey, 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 who are you talking to? What are you doing? What are you doing?" Or, I'll be in public doing it and then I look around and people are staring at me, just kind of how it is. But it's just distracting. It's very distracting. Sometimes I just can't focus on what I'm doing because I'm too focused on like kind of like astral projecting myself into another land. So it's really just like a whole visual in front of my face. So if I can only see what I'm visualizing, I kind of forget where I am in life. And that's kind of how it presents to me. But I have to say that symptoms have really gone away due to the medication that I take. But of course, they're always still there somewhat. But they used to be really, really bad. Like I would try to like go to work and I'm on my computer, but I can't see my computer because I'm too busy like visualizing in front of my face. So it got in the way of a lot of work, but I now have it pretty managed under control. Yeah.
So you said you take medication, but like what are some of the other things that you do to manage symptoms when they come up?
Well, since it's so much of like a visual thing, and it can happen anywhere, if I'm with people, it helps because then I'm actually talking to real people. So it happens more when I'm just alone. It could happen. So you can think of it like, if I'm bored, I'm never really that bored because I'm busy. But still, it's like, dude, like this is really annoying because sometimes it gets really delusional and I'll start believing that these conversations really did happen when they never happened. Almost like when you wake up from a dream and you're like, wait, did that happen or was it didn't happen? Is it a dream? Is it real? What? But that just happens in my everyday life. So if they get really intense, if I start really believing them, I'll just call a friend and I'll be like, hey, did this happen? Are you sure? Like, did this happen? And they're usually like, no, that never happened. What are you talking about? So that's kind of how I manage it sometimes. Or I'll say like, I think this happened. And I'll explain what happened. And they're like, you've never said this before. So I'm going to think you're just making that up. And I'm like, okay, good. Because I hope that's not real. So really having a good support team is actually very important to me.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds like something that would be hard for someone who is experiencing this and doesn't have someone to like go to or doesn't feel comfortable like or talking about what they're going through. It would
Hmm.
be a little bit more difficult to kind of have to sit with it and figure out on your own if it's real or if like that discussion or something actually happened or if it didn't happen.
Yeah, like I've sent people emails, like people that I haven't spoken to in 2 years. Like I've emailed them and I'm like, hey, do you remember this night at that time did this happen? They're like, well, that was like 2 years ago. So I don't remember the details, but I don't remember that happening. But like that's what happens. And I'll be like, that night 2 years ago, this person said that to me, and that was a bad thing to say to me, and that was mean. Should I be mad at them? Maybe I should be angry, when everyone's like, what are you talking about? That never happened. Just what are you doing? So like I said, having people to talk to and actually, validate if it was true or false is actually really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think I'm really glad that you mentioned it because I feel like with all mental illness, a support system is like crucial to be able to get through it.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It is so crucial to have a support team. I don't know where I would be if I didn't have my support team. I think I'd I'd either be dead or I'd be homeless,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah, me too. And something that I've heard you talk about like on the podcast that you do, just like the experience of having schizophrenia in New York City. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that experience as well, like how you navigate that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. The thing is, you walk down the street, everybody has headphones on and everything. So if they're talking to themselves, they could be on the phone. So if I'm talking to myself, I could be on the phone. And especially with the new mask thing, who knows if they know what I'm talking to, right? That's really handy. And when I ride the subway, something I found really helpful was putting sunglasses on and headphones on, just because if I'm talking to myself, oftentimes I would stare at somebody and they're like, why is that girl staring at me and talking? Like, what is she doing? So, I would put sunglasses on so people don't know where I'm staring, because I'll just zone out and do that. Or I'll burst into laughter sometimes. And it gets really weird. But I'll also keep the headphones on. So if my mouth would start moving, this was pre-masks, the mask is really helping. But if I'm talking to myself, to be like, oh, she's just singing a song on her headphones or something like that. That's kind of how I navigated the subway. Or if you zone out on the subway, like Mr. Stop, that's really frustrating. But it happens to the best of us, zone out on the subway. But also, New York City, like there's so much noise that I think I'll hear my name being called, which is it just the hallucination voice? Who knows? Or maybe it was just somebody yelling and I thought I heard my name. Who knows? They're always doing construction. There's always banging. So I don't know if the noise is in my head or it's really just external noise. And it's almost not that weird to see somebody talking to themselves in New York City, because it's like everywhere. Like there's just everybody is just saying, like, if you just overhear conversations in New York City, it's ridiculous sometimes. So everyone just doesn't really get in people's business like that, unless you're acting dangerous and erratic or trying to just make a huge scene. Nobody really cares. Everyone's just really minding their own business, doing their own thing.
Yeah, I feel like that also touches on, like, the ways that adapt to your environment, and I think a lot of people feel like with any mental illness, it's about kind of getting rid of symptoms, and I feel like mental illness is viewed as something that you have to get rid of and that you can't really, like, survive and, like, thrive with, but what's interesting about, your story in schizophrenia is that you still experience those symptoms, but, like, you've learned to live with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Mhm.
I, people have said they like maybe they're cured from schizophrenia, but I think if you're on medication for schizophrenia, how are you 100% cured? Like that kind of confuses me. I don't think there necessarily might be a cure. I just think it can be well managed. And that's what I consider myself, well managed. Because there's the whole high functioning. Okay. But people don't like the word high functioning. So, I mean, I don't know what to call myself then, because people are always policing words for some reason. You can't say this, you can't say that, you can't say this, you got to say this word and that word and that word. And that's usually only comes from people without mental illness telling people with mental illness what they can and cannot say, which makes no sense, in my opinion. Like, am I schizophrenic or a person with schizophrenia? I didn't realize, like, I mean, I'm the person with it. Why can't I say what I want to say or whatever? That just bugs me, but that's a whole nother topic. But it's like, I consider myself well managed. I function well and I live my life well. I take medicine every morning and every night, and that's just how I roll. I don't think there really is a cure or anything like that, but maybe one day there will be, or maybe the one day there'll be an even better way to manage it. But I don't think there's just like, poof, you're cured. Like I don't really think that's something that makes any sense to me, because I don't
Yeah.
think, if they don't know what causes it really, how can they know how to fix it really? It doesn't make any sense to me, you know?
Yeah, I agree, and I think people think that's a negative thing. Like, I experienced that with, like, my eating disorder and, like, my anxiety. It's something that, I take medication, and, like, for the eating disorder specifically, I expect to always have trouble, or not trouble, but always have periods in my life where I may get those thoughts again and have a hard time with food, and when that times comes, I'm gonna deal with it, but it doesn't, like, feel negative that that's something I may have to deal with my whole life, but definitely, I feel like people who don't experience these things or don't know much about them, they're like, "That's horrible, like, living your whole life having to deal with that, that's just the worst thing possible," when that's not the case.
It's not. It's not the
Yeah.
case. And they don't realize that, but they're still gonna judge you on that no matter what. Yeah.
And I think that's why these conversations are so important, and just talking about mental health in everyday conversations will kinda help explain that to people and get that across.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And like eating disorders are really like something that's hard because triggers are everywhere.
Right, and then it's at that point, it's just about managing it because that's all you can do, like, all you can do is take care of yourself, you can't really control the people around you and the people you see every day.
I know it's not easy. It's totally frustrating.
I agree. I think, that brings me to talk about, Schizophrenic NYC and, um, just wanting to know, like, how did you come up with the idea of, creating a clothing brand, and, what was the process in making it into what it is today?
Well, I wanted to do something that way, spread awareness for mental health and get people talking about mental health. And since I worked for in all different like kind of like industries of graphic and web design, I was like, okay, so I know how to build a brand, and I created the designs, and then it was like, okay, now I got to figure out how to sell it. And then I just joined a flea market and started with pop-up shops. I had a friend that was a videographer. We made a video, and then I got featured on something, and things started snowballing into what it is today. Like I made a video, I put it on Facebook. I was featured in the Daily Mail because I had this brand, and I posted like an interview I did, and then someone on my lacrosse team who worked at the Daily Mail was like, "Hey, can we feature you in the Daily Mail? We get 10 million views a month." I goes like, of course you can. Of course you can. So like how lucky was that? Because I was on a lacrosse team with a girl who worked at the Daily Mail. Like things just kind of happen sometimes. And then I don't know how it happened, but somehow people started buying my things. And it was really, really cool because being an artist for so long, it's kind of like, when is anyone gonna like? Do people like my artwork? Do people like what I do? And then it's like when someone buys something you create, it's like, oh my God, people like what I make. This is amazing.
I feel like your art is so unique in the designs you come up with. I was just wondering how do you come up with those designs? Are they something that, like, you've been working on for years, or are they, like, newer? Like, how did you come up with them?
Like the swirly designs, like these ones.
Yeah.
Those all started when I was like 20 years old, and I was working at a sleepaway camp, and I was in a bunk with 12-year-olds. And they basically, 12-year-old girls can make you not happy. We'll just say not happy. So this is what I did. On day off, I went to Walmart and I got a sketchbook and magic markers. And I just started drawing really intricate, detailed drawings. And then after the summer, I had a full notebook of really intricate, detailed drawings. I just started drawing to just get rid of my rapid racing thoughts. I would just draw really detailed pictures, just filling the entire page with swirls and outlines and all these really detailed pictures. And then knowing graphic design, because that's what I went to college for, and I just always knew Photoshop. I took those pictures that I drew, I brought them into the computer, I messed around with layers and gradient maps and all that fun stuff. And then I just got these designs, and people think they're awesome, which is so cool because being able to create art is cool, but then people actually buying your art is like so awesome because then it validates what you do, and that's just so cool. I don't know how to explain how awesome it is that like the art that I created and I love, other people find it awesome as well. Like it's so amazing. And it's like art that I find like very therapeutic, It comes from that high place of anxiety and stress and just wanting to escape the world, and people find it just like really just it soothes them. It's like I make it so like your eyes are always constantly moving around looking at the artwork. There's no real set focal point because it kind of is what goes on in my head all the time. There's no set actual point. It just constantly moves rapidly all around the place. So it's kind of like how you see my brain kind of moving. It's kind of like that. If that explains it well. It's fun, and it's therapeutic, and it's just really cool. I don't know. People buy them, and I love it.
Yeah, I can imagine, like, how validating and just awesome that probably feels. Okay, so I only have a few more questions. One thing that I always ask people is about common misconceptions about, whatever diagnosis they have, because I think we all know what the common misconceptions about mental health are out there, but like there's certain ones that I experience like on a daily basis when I interact with people. that are, like, specific to my experience, so I'm wondering if there are some like that with you when you have interactions with people, like random people and your family and friends.
I think a lot of people like to say things like, "Are you hearing things right now? Do you see anybody in the room?" Things like that, and I'm like, "No, no." And if I was, I wouldn't tell them either, you know? I'm not gonna be like, "Oh, yeah, I'm totally distracted hearing things and hallucinating," but I would never tell them that. And then just, like, annoying things. Just like, "So what do you see? What do you hear? Tell me more about it." Like, that's just nothing I wanna answer, so it's kinda frustrating.
Yeah, and I think that brings up another question, like, if someone wants to, like, talk to you about, schizophrenia and your experience with schizophrenia, what would be the best way for someone to, like, approach you and ask about that? I feel like people, since they have this conception that mental illness is always a negative thing, they don't even wanna, like, try to learn about a person's what they're experiencing, so, like, what do you think is the best way for someone who just wants to know more to, like, ask someone who deals with these things?
Well, if they wanna know more, I think they should first just ask the person, "Is it okay if I ask you some questions?" Like, that's really important, like, not just berate somebody with questions, but say, "I have some questions, may I ask you?" And then whoever it is can say yes or no. That's really the most important thing. Make sure you have consent before you just go, "I have questions for you. Okay, here's my first question. What do you see? Okay, because what meds are you on?" Like, don't ever ask somebody what meds they're on. That's like really not a good question because meds work differently for each person. So I'm never going to tell you what meds I'm on because God forbid somebody else goes on those meds and something horrible happens to them. And they say, well, oh, Michelle told me she takes that med and it works good for her, but look what it did to this person over here. Like, I'm not responsible for that. So I will never answer the question of what meds I'm on, even though every time at my pop up shop, every single doctor that has ever come has said, "What meds are you on?" All the time. All the time. It's so weird.
That's ridiculous.
Mhm.
Wow. That's just, like, kinda mind-blowing to me that, like, a doctor would do that.
All the time. They're all the time. But they always say something, "Oh, I see. You're doing well, though. You're medicated, right? What are you on?" All the
Oh
time.
my goodness.
Every
Wow.
doctor. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think, like, all of the things that you're saying is, like, it feels like it should be common sense, but it's
Mhm.
almost like people, like, freak out when they're like, "Oh my goodness, this person has this," and they forget everything about talking to a human. Um,
Right? I'm like it's almost like they're talking to an illness with a voice.
yeah, yeah, and I think it's important that we emphasize that we are not our illnesses, and I think that's also something that I struggle with even with myself is identifying so much with all of my diagnoses and, like, separating who I am from the diagnoses and not just, like, explaining myself as someone who is anxious and depressed and has trouble with eating and, like, filtering those things out first and talking about who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So that's pretty much it. I guess one thing that I've been asking recently in my interviews is, um, what is one thing that you wish, um, either one of these. So one thing that you wish more people knew about schizophrenia, or one thing that you wish you knew about schizophrenia like years ago.
Something I wish like I knew about schizophrenia years ago is that it's not the worst illness you could possibly have. Everything's on a spectrum. And I feel like almost in the mental health field or not the field but or mental health patients, they'll be like, like thank God I'm bipolar and not schizophrenic. And then sometimes I think, like I have bipolar friends and I am so much more stable than they are. So what are you talking about? Like that's not even true, so like the level of like what diagnosis you have doesn't mean you're any sicker than anybody else. It's how you manage your illness. So I think I could have been diagnosed sooner if I would have just gotten over the stigma of thinking that I had schizophrenia and not wanting to be diagnosed with it. And I could have helped myself sooner as well. And I kind of wish I did that.
Okay, so to wrap up, like, what are some other places that, my audience and myself can stay up to date with, your work and any advocacy that you're doing?
I guess if you want to stay up to date, you can check out my Instagram, Schizophrenic NYC, the website, Schizophrenic NYC. I have a Twitter, Schizophrenic NY, because the C was too long. And then I guess Facebook, Schizophrenic NYC. I mean, that's how you can find me all over the internet. And then, and you can check out the vlog podcast that I have with Cecilia McGow, Schizophrenia and the City. You can learn a lot there as well. And who knows what I'm doing next? I now have an office in my apartment. It's pretty cool. If you're in New York and you don't have COVID and you want to drop by the office, you totally can. It's in Queens. So there you can find me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Students of Mind. Because of the fact that there are so many negative myths and misconceptions around schizophrenia, I really wanted to make sure to make the episode in a way that doesn't contribute to the stigma that's already out there. And I know that I'm not someone with schizophrenia and I'm looking from the outside in, so I want to elevate more voices of people living with schizophrenia. So I really encourage you guys to check out the resources that are in the description of this episode and on our website. There you can also find links to see more of Michelle's work, which is really great. She's very active on her Instagram and has a podcast with Cecilia McGow, who is another schizophrenia activist. If you want to contact Linda or learn more about SARTA, there are links for that in the description as well. To stay up to date with Students of Mind, you can follow us on Instagram or go to our website. If you like the music you hear in the show, it's all made by my friend John Tyler, and his Instagram is also listed in the description of every episode if you want to check out more of his stuff. If you have time, please rate and leave a review for the podcast. That helps me see if you guys are liking the episodes, and it also helps get the show and all of what we talk about into more ears. Thanks again for listening, and I can't wait to share more with you next time.